Hi. So here's my new studio, and hopefully you like the little uh, night sky thing I got going on. I'm not sure my whole lighting thing sucks, but hey, that's okay, right? We're all working through this, so I thought this was kind of something different. So welcome to Chapter 15, Monopolies, and we're going to look at this. I think there's 5 objectives altogether that we're going to look at. So let's go ahead and get started with Objective 1, an introduction. Okay, so what we're going to look at is monopolies and why they arise. Now, there are no monopolies in the purest form in the United States because we like market and we like those things that allow those producers that can produce it most efficiently to be able to do so, and those buyers who are willing and able to buy it. So we kind of don't like one and only one seller. Okay, so what we're going to accomplish in this chapter is we're going to go ahead and look at why do monopolies arise? That's our first objective. 2 is why is price always greater than marginal revenue for a monopolist? How do monopolies choose price and quantity? And if you're already thinking ahead, you're going, marginal revenue, marginal cost. You're right. And then in another objective, we'll look at how do they affect society's well-being. Lastly, what is price discrimination? And so we're going to look at, first of all, why do monopolies arise? Okay, so a monopoly is one and only one seller without any substitutes. There's another term that we use sometimes in economics called a monopsony. And this is when there's only one buyer. So it might be the government, for example. That might be a monopsony. And then that's where all the power lies in this particular monopsony. Okay, but we're interested mostly in monopolies. So we're going to first compare and contrast it to a perfectly competitive market. I really like these slides. I think it's good stuff, particularly for the test. Remember that we looked at a perfectly competitive market, and we said in a perfectly competitive market, all the power is with the buyer. Here, in a monopoly, all the power is with the seller. So the market power resides with the seller. And they can sell it at any price that they choose to. They can also decide how much to produce, and maybe that's equilibrium, maybe it's not. So monopolies arise because of barriers to entry. And here's some examples. And remember, that means that it's very difficult to get into this market. So the first one is it's a resource constraint. Okay, so this is where we would say, okay, if you own all the resources, then you would have perfectly inelastic Okay. So if we talk about drug manufacturers and the idea of copyrights, you own the single resource to be able to produce that pharmaceutical drug. Here's another example. What we do see in the US, our government gives a single right to produce. So liquor license might be a good example. Others might be the idea of energy. So electricity is a great example. The government here grants the sole right for one organization to be able to supply electricity in a certain area. And again, some other things we see, patents and copyright laws. The last reason is a natural monopoly. And a natural monopoly kind of goes along with what we just looked at here, the government. Many times what we see in natural monopolies is the government grants a sole right only because if they were to open this up to competition, competition would not make the price go down. The competition would actually make the price go up. And the reason is that when one or we have a sole producer, they can produce at that economies of scale that we've talked about before. So they can produce at economies of scale, which means then that their overall price that they charge is regulated, but that price in the long term will be equal to average total cost. And because we know that if you're in economies of scale, as you increase the quantity, the average total cost per unit goes down. That's the reason why the government would create a natural monopoly. Here's a great example. Here, the average total cost curve, we know, slopes downward. And if we had 1,000 companies that were able to produce electricity, they would have to charge $50. Okay, so 1,000 homes, we'd have to charge $50. If we, however, open this up to competition and that firm now can only supply to 500, notice that the price or the cost of electricity goes up greatly. So the idea of reaping from the economies of scale says, hey, as our quantity increases, our average total cost decreases. And so therefore, with something like electricity, then it makes sense to create barriers to entry, not allow everyone to get into this market, because everyone would have to produce less and the price would go up. Okay, hopefully that has given you a really good introduction to monopolies, and I'll see you back next time for Objective 2. Stay safe, be well.